I'm 55 years old, and every single night of my life for the last 34 years, I check that front door twice before I go to bed. Not once, twice. My wife stopped asking me why around year 5 of our marriage, my kids grew up thinking it was just something Dad did, like checking the mail or watching the evening news. Nobody in my house knows where that habit came from. Not really. Not the actual reason. Buried under 34 years of just being Dad's thing or Dad's routine. I was 19 years old, out of a little town in the Texas Panhandle, when they sent me to the desert in 1990. Operation Desert Storm, they called it. And looking back now, decades later, I understand it was short as wars go. A matter of weeks, really, compared to what men before me went through in other wars. Short doesn't mean small, though. Short doesn't mean it doesn't follow you home and settle into your bones for the rest of your natural life. I check that door twice every night. Tonight, for the first time, I'm going to tell you why. Growing up in the Panhandle, everything was flat and wide, and you could see trouble coming from a mile off. A storm rolling in, a truck kicking up dust on a gravel road, whatever it was. My daddy ran cattle on a spread outside of town so small it didn't rate a stoplight. I figured I'd take over that operation someday, same as generations before me had done. Instead, at 18, I enlisted. Wanted to see something bigger than flat land and cattle fences, I suppose, the way young men do. Never occurred to me the desert I'd end up seeing would be a whole different kind of flat and wide, a whole different kind of nowhere to hide. We shipped out in late 90, and I remember the briefings before we ever crossed into Kuwait. Officers talking careful, measured, about the possibility of chemical weapons, nerve agents, things with names I'd never heard before and hoped I'd never hear again. They issued us gear for it, trained us on it, and none of that training ever fully left me, not once, not for 34 years. The ground war itself was fast. 100 hours, they'd tell us later, once it was over and historians started putting numbers to things. But before the ground war, there were weeks of air campaign, nights when the sky lit up with more firepower than I'd ever imagined existed. And every single one of those nights, we slept or tried to sleep, not knowing for certain what might come down out of that sky next. That's the part nobody back home ever really understood. Not fully. It wasn't just the danger of bombs or bullets. It was the not knowing. The alarms that would sound in the middle of the night, telling us to get our masks on fast, chemical attack possible, and you'd fumble in the pitch dark for that mask with your heart. Going 1,000 miles an hour, never sure if this alarm was the real one or another false alarm like the dozen before it. Most nights it was false, but you couldn't know that going in. Every single time that alarm sounded, your body reacted like it might be the night that wasn't false, and there's no amount of telling yourself it's probably nothing that stops your hands from shaking while you find that mask in the dark. There was a fella in my unit, Ramirez from El Paso, slept in the cot next to mine most of that deployment. He had a habit of checking his gear 3 times before he'd let himself close his eyes. Mask, gloves, the whole kit laid out just so, close enough to grab without even opening his eyes if the alarm sounded. I used to tease him about it, gentle, the way soldiers tease each other about anything that looks a little bit like fear showing through. He just shrugged it off. Man, I'd rather check 3 times and feel foolish than check 0 times and not wake up at all. I didn't understand what he meant, not really, not until later. Not until my own body started doing something similar without me ever deciding it should. We went through the ground war together, Ramirez and me, fast and brutal and over quicker than either of us expected, given everything the briefings had prepared us to expect. We came through it, both of us physically whole, which by the numbers of that war was more fortune than a lot of families back home got to keep. But something had changed in how my body understood nighttime. I didn't notice it right away, It crept in slow the way these things do. I came home to Texas in the spring of '91, welcome different than the men before me from other wars. Parades, actually. Yellow ribbons on every tree in town. My mother crying happy tears at the airport instead of the careful, quiet kind some other families had to learn. I was grateful for that welcome. Grateful in a way I don't think I fully appreciated until years later. Hearing stories from men who'd come home from other wars to something a whole lot colder. But somewhere in that first year home, I noticed I was checking the front door before bed. Once, then twice testing the lock each time, even though I just tested it 30 seconds before. My mother noticed too, asked me about it once, gentle, and I told her it was nothing, just being careful, and she let it be, the way mothers sometimes do when the sense pushing won't get them anywhere good. I met Sarah, my wife, 2 years after coming home. And by then the door checking was just part of who I was, same as any other habit a body settles into. She noticed early on in the first few months we were together, but she didn't push either, not at first. Just watched, quiet, the way you watch somebody you're falling for, trying to understand the shape of them before you ask hard questions. We got married, had 2 kids, built a life that looked, from the outside, about as ordinary and settled as any life in the Panhandle. I took over my daddy's cattle operation eventually, same as I'd always figured I would, and most days that old desert felt like it belonged to somebody else's memory, not mine. Most days, not every night. Every single night without fail, before I'd let myself climb into bed, I'd walk to that front door and check the lock, turn it, test it, walk away, and something in me would pull me back for a second check before I could actually let my shoulders drop and call it done. Sarah asked me about it more directly once our kids were old enough to notice too, our son asking her quiet in the kitchen one evening, "Why does Dad check the door twice?" I heard him ask it from the next room. I didn't have an answer ready. Not one I felt equipped to hand a curious 7-year-old boy. Sarah told him something simple. That's just something your father does to make sure we're safe. And let it be, the same mercy my own mother had shown me decades before. I've thought about that moment more than almost any other in 30 years of marriage. Ramirez and I stayed in touch over the years, phone calls mostly, and about 6 years ago, he called me up out of the blue on a Tuesday evening and just started talking, no preamble, about how he'd finally told his own wife the real reason behind checking his gear all those years back in the desert, and how it turned out she'd always known there was more to it, just been waiting for him to be ready to say it out loud. Something about that phone call sat with me a long while after we hung up. Last year, my son, grown now, 26 years old himself, home for a visit with his own young daughter, watched me do my nightly ritual at the front door, same as he'd watched 1,000 times growing up, but this time he said something different. "Dad, does that door thing ever go away? Or is that just permanent now?" And something about him asking it as a grown man, a father himself now, made me finally say the truth out loud for the first time in 34 years. I told him about the alarms in the desert, the fumbling in the dark for a mask, the not knowing whether tonight was the real thing or another false one. I told him that checking that door twice isn't really about the door at all. It's about a part of me that learned at 19 years old that safety isn't something you can just assume. It's something you have to check. And check again. My son didn't say much after I told him. He just nodded, slow, the way a person does when they're taking something seriously instead of trying to fix it right away. Then he said, "No, thanks for telling me, Dad." 3 words meant more to me than I think he understood in the moment. If you've got somebody in your life with a habit that doesn't quite make sense to you, a routine, a ritual, something that looks small from the outside but might be carrying something a whole lot bigger underneath, I hope you'll ask them about it gently, and I hope you'll subscribe here to hear more stories like mine, because I think there's a lot of us walking around with our own version of checking the door twice. And not enough of us have said why out loud. Because here's what 34 years has taught me. That habit never fully goes away, but it gets lighter a little every time you let somebody else understand it with you instead of carrying it alone in the dark. I still check that door twice every night. I don't imagine that's going to change at this point in my life, and honestly, I've made a kind of peace with that. It's part of who the desert made me. Same as the calluses on a rancher's hands are part of what the land makes of him. But it feels different now doing it, since that conversation with my son. Less like a secret I'm keeping from my own family, and more like something they understand alongside me. Sarah still watches me do it some nights, same as she has for 30 years. But there's a different look on her face now. Less puzzled. More like she's simply witnessing something she finally has the full shape of. Ramirez and I talk more now, too. Real conversations, not just catching up. Turns out there's a lot two old soldiers can say to each other once they've both finally said the hard thing first, same as it was for men from other wars, other generations, same as it probably always has been. My granddaughter's 3 years old, too young yet to ask about the door, but I imagine someday she will, the way my own son eventually did. When she does, I won't wait 34 years to answer her honest. I check that door twice every night, and I'll probably keep doing it till I'm not around to do it anymore, but it doesn't feel like a burden the way it used to. Not since I stopped carrying the reason for it all by myself. If you've got a habit like that, something that doesn't make sense to the people around you until you finally explain where it came from, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. You don't have to explain the whole thing, just tell me it's there. Sometimes that's the first door that needs checking, and it's a lot easier to open than the one at the front of the house. I've got more of these stories, more nights and more reasons behind them. I'll be right here whenever you're ready to hear the next one.